That pencil-thin celery on the left and those thick store-style stalks on the right came from the same tall Utah 5270 variety in the same raised bed. I chased that difference for 2 seasons before I found the missing window. Most growing guides barely mention those final 3 weeks, and the mistake that kept mine thin looked exactly like good plant care. Unless you know what to stop, yours stays thin. The first season. I told myself the seed packet just had bad instructions. Water, feed, thin the seedlings, wait. I followed every step in order and still ended up standing in my kitchen, holding a bunch of leaves so dark and ruffled it looked like I had grown oversized parsley by accident. Not one stalk much thicker than a pencil. Second season. I did not change a single thing about the variety. Same tall Utah 52-70, same raised bed, same 6 hours of sun, same Zone 6 backyard I have gardened in for years. I figured the problem had to be me. Some people just have a hand for celery, and I did not. I remember standing at the counter that 2nd October, rinsing off that bunch of leaves, and thinking about the celery at the grocery store down the road. Pale, thick stalks, snapping clean when you bend them, and marked up every single week like it was somehow rare. Mine looked like a science project gone sideways next to it. Here is the part that took me 2 full years to notice. Every guide I read, every seed packet I flipped over, walks you through germination, spacing, thinning, watering the seedlings in. Then it stops. Right around transplant, like the job is finished at that point. Nobody follows you into the final stretch before harvest, the part that actually decides what your stalks look like on the day you pull them. That gap is not some small oversight. It is the whole reason a first-year gardener and someone who has grown food for 20 years can plant the same cultivar, in the same zone, and walk away with 2 completely different results. Your celery is not weaker than store celery. Your seed is not some inferior batch. Your seed packet is fully capable of the same results sitting under that plastic wrap. The variety was never what held you back. What separates the 2 bunches was never luck, and it was never a green thumb you happened to skip out on. It comes down to a handful of specific choices most people never even hear about, made in a stretch of time most guides never mention. I did not know that stretch existed either, not through 2 straight seasons of parsley pretending to be celery. Turns out the fix wasn't in what I planted, it was in what I did. And when I stopped doing it, across the whole season, not just at the end. And that 3-week window starts with something most people get wrong from the very first week. Water. If you have been watering celery whenever you remember, heavy on Saturday, forgotten until Wednesday, that swing right there is reason number 1 your stalks stay thin. Celery does not have the deep-digging roots that tomatoes rely on. Your tomato plants push roots down 2-3 feet, chasing moisture long after the surface has dried out. Celery keeps almost all of its roots in the top few inches, spread out wide instead of down. Think of it less like a taproot and more like a thin sponge lying flat right where the ground dries first. Let that sponge go bone dry, then dump a bucket of water on it all at once. And you only ever wet the outer edge. The middle stays dry no matter how heavy you water. Your celery plant reacts to that swing the same way a body reacts to going hungry and then overeating. It cannot chase water down the way a tomato can. So it starts building extra fibrous tissue through the stalk instead. A kind of internal scaffolding meant to help it survive the next dry stretch. That fibrous buildup is exactly what you are biting into when a homegrown stalk turns stringy and tastes stronger than anything wrapped in plastic at the store. It is not your variety failing you. It is your plant defending itself against a watering habit. And once that tissue builds up partway through the season, you cannot water it back out. The stalk stays the way it is for the rest of that harvest. That is why the fix has to start early, not the week before you pull the plants. 1 to 2 inches of water a week. Every week, with no exceptions, is what keeps that swing from ever starting in the first place. Steady beats heavy. Split that into 2 or 3 deep soakings instead of a quick daily splash. Because a daily splash barely gets past the first inch of soil before the afternoon sun pulls it right back out. Push a finger 3 to 4 inches down next to the base before you decide it is time to water again. Old-timers never had a fancy meter for this. They just used a finger and a bit of patience. It should feel like a sponge that has already been wrung out, cool and damp. Never soaked, and never bone dry either. A soaker hose, left running low and slow for an hour, does this job better than standing there with a hose in your hand. And it does it while you go do something else entirely. This schedule is built for celery growing in the ground or in a raised bed. Container celery loses moisture faster with all that extra exposed surface around the pot, so you will likely need to check it every single day instead of once a week. Get that rhythm locked in early, and you have already fixed the first reason most backyard celery never thickens up. But even if you get the water perfectly even, there is a second mistake waiting, and this is the one that actually surprised me the most. This next part is the one I got backwards for 2 seasons in a row. I did what felt like common sense. More nitrogen, more growth, right? Every fertilizer commercial ever made trains you to think that way. And nobody ever tells you there's a point where that logic flips on its head. So I side-dressed my celery every few weeks straight through the season, feeding it all the way to harvest, convinced I was doing the plant a favor. Both of those years, I ended up with a jungle of dark green leaves taller than my knee and stalks that stayed exactly as skinny as the day I transplanted them. I kept buying more fertilizer, thinking the next bag would finally be the one that fixed it. It never was. I was reading a Utah State University Extension bulletin on celery one evening, and one line stopped me cold. It said to feed nitrogen at 4 weeks and at 8 weeks after transplanting, then stop. Not feed it all season long, stop. That was exactly the one thing I had never done. Here is why that single word matters so much. Nitrogen is like handing your celery a to-do list with exactly one item on it. Grow more leaves. As long as that list is still in its hand, the plant never gets around to thickening what's underneath. Every extra dose you give it past that 8-week mark just tells it to write the same item at the top of the list again, all season long. It never crosses that item off on its own. You have to be the one who takes the list away. What that actually means for your celery is simple. Green, leafy, and thriving is not the same thing as thick and ready to harvest. Those are 2 entirely different jobs the plant can do, and it can only focus on one at a time. You are not failing. You are just feeding it a job it never needed help finishing. 1 extra bag of fertilizer at a time. The schedule that actually works is side dressing a 1/4 cup of 2100 nitrogen fertilizer per 10 feet of row, once at week 4 after transplanting and once again at week 8. Then you stop completely, the moment you see the stalks start to swell at the base. Not fade it out slowly over another week or 2. Stop, full stop, same day you notice that swelling. Push past that point, and you are not just wasting fertilizer, you are working against the plant. Because too much nitrogen after the stalks start forming raises the risk of splitting right down the middle of what you were trying to grow in the first place. A split stalk is not a small cosmetic issue either. A split stalk is damaged produce. It will not hold nearly as long in the crisper as a clean one. If your soil started out genuinely poor, you may need 1 light feeding around week 2 before you even get to this schedule. Do not force this rigidly onto ground that was already starved to begin with. But for anyone gardening in decent soil that has had a season or 2 of compost worked into it, 4 weeks and 8 weeks is the whole schedule. Nothing after that. Same variety as before. That same tall Utah 5270 sitting in my raised bed both seasons. Same Zone 6 backyard. Same 6 hours of sun. The only thing that changed between the bunch of leaves and the bunch of stalks was when I stopped feeding it. Not what I planted, and not some green thumb I finally grew overnight. Get the water even and the nitrogen timed right, and your celery finally has the raw material for a thick stalk. But raw material isn't the same as what you see on a grocery store shelf, and that's a completely different fix. If that nitrogen mistake just saved you from wasting another season on nothing but celery leaves, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. YouTube will let you know the second the next one drops. Blanching will not make a thin stalk thick. Water and nitrogen already did that work. This last step only changes color and flavor. So once the water is steady and the nitrogen stops on time, what actually turns green stalks into the pale, mild ones from the store? Blanching, blocking light off the stalk itself for the last 2 to 3 weeks before you pull the plant. That single window is the difference between a stalk that tastes sharp and looks bright green and one that comes out pale, mild, and snaps clean the way it does in the produce aisle. Sunlight is what makes celery build up the tough, bitter compounds in the stalk in the first place. Block the light for those 3 weeks and the plant simply stops bothering to make them, like shutting down a factory that only runs when someone's watching. Gardeners have done this for generations, long before anyone wrote it down in a manual, and none of the 3 methods costs you more than what is already sitting in your recycling bin. There are 3 common ways to block that light. Mound soil or mulch up around the base of the plant, right up to just under where the leaves start, wrap 2 or 3 layers of newspaper or cardboard around the stalks and tie it with string. 3 ways, same result. Or slide a hollow tube down over the whole plant, an old coffee can with both ends cut off, or a milk carton with the bottom sliced away. Whatever is in your kitchen trash already works better than anything you would find at the garden center for this. Whichever method you pick, cover the stalk only. Leave the leaves up top exposed to full sun. The plant still needs that sunlight hitting its leaves to keep growing and stay alive through those final 3 weeks. An old gardener I know, been growing celery on the same plot for going on 30 years, showed me his trick one September afternoon. Nothing fancy, just an old coffee can with both ends cut out, pushed down over each plant 3 weeks before he planned to pull it. He said his mother did the same thing with a paper bag over the whole row. Cheapest 3 weeks of work in the whole season, he told me, and the only 3 weeks that make celery look like something you would actually pay for. Time it from your expected harvest date. Most celery matures somewhere between 100 and 140 days, depending on the variety. So count backward 3 weeks from that date, and that is when you cover the stalks. Not a week earlier and not a week later. Don't leave that cover on much past 3 weeks, though. Leave the cover on longer than 3 weeks, and you raise the risk of rot or fungus setting in at the base, from all that extra moisture sitting against the stalk with no light to dry it out. Do not stretch it past that window trying to get extra pale stalks. And if you happen to be growing tall Utah 52 to 70, the same variety we started this whole video with, it's commonly sold as a no blanching variety, though it stays more medium green than pale. Give it a shorter cover, maybe a week, if you want that lighter look. Or skip it and judge by the stalk itself. Do all 3, the water, the nitrogen, the 3-week cover, and what you pull out of the ground, stops looking like a bunch of parsley and starts looking like something worth putting on a cutting board. Zoom out from the coffee can and the mound of soil, and what you're really looking at is a 3-week window nobody mentioned back when you started. Every seed packet, every basic how-to guide walks you through the exact same ground: sun, soil, spacing, water the seedlings in, transplant when the danger of frost has passed. Every seed packet still stops at the same place, transplant day, like clockwork, and leaves you standing there 3 months later wondering why your bunch looks nothing like the one at the store. It was never the variety. Same tall Utah 5270 sitting in that same raised bed, 3 seasons running. Two of those seasons, a jungle of leaves and stalks the width of a pinky. The third season, water held steady all the way through. Nitrogen stopped cold at week 8. 3 weeks of a coffee can blocking the light before harvest. Same seed packet both times. Completely different bunch of celery standing on the counter. It was never a green thumb either. Thick stalks come down to 3 decisions. How even your water stays all season, when you make yourself stop the nitrogen, and whether you give those final weeks to blocking the light. It comes down to how even your water stays, whether you actually stop the nitrogen on time, and if you give those final weeks to blocking the light. I think back to that first bunch, standing at my kitchen counter holding leaves that looked like an oversized bunch of parsley, wondering what I had done wrong. Third season, same counter, same variety, and this time I am holding something pale and thick that snaps clean in half. Nothing about the seed changed between those 2 moments. Everything about the last 3 weeks did. This works strongest for celery grown in the ground or a raised bed in zone 5 through 9, maturing into cool fall weather. In much hotter zones, or anything colder than zone 4, you will need to push your planting date back from your first frost date. Do not follow the week 4, week 8 nitrogen schedule rigidly if your growing season runs shorter than that. That's the whole difference between a bunch of leaves and a bunch you'd actually buy. And it never once needed a different variety of celery. Every How to Grow guide ends at transplanting, because that's the easy part to film. The 3 weeks before harvest are where an ordinary bunch of celery either becomes something worth your kitchen counter or stays exactly what it always was. One more thing before you go. You do not have to harvest the whole plant the day the 3 weeks are up. Cut the outer stalks first and let the center keep blanching under cover a few more days. You get a first taste sooner, and the inner stalks come out even paler. Tonight, before you head inside, push your finger 3 to 4 inches into the soil next to your celery. If it's dry past the first knuckle, set up a soaker hose or drip line before the weekend. Then mark your calendar for 3 weeks before your expected harvest date. That's the day you mound the soil or wrap the stalks, not a day earlier. Store-bought celery was never magic. It's just 3 weeks somebody finally paid attention to.